Great. Thank you all so much for joining us in what has been a harrowing week for the Asian American community in already a very distressing year. My name is Snehal Desai, and I'm the producing artistic director of East West Players. East West Players is the longest running theater of color in the country, and for over 55 years, we have been seeking to reframe the Asian American narrative to one that reflects our own experiences. And we have also sought to give a stage and platform to those whose voices have been marginalized and uplift those stories that motivate us towards action. We are all still very much trying to make sense of the events on Tuesday and the more than doubling of hate crimes against the Asian American community in 1 year. Tonight, we wanted to provide a space and platform for us to come together. In particular, we wanted to highlight the targeting of Asian American women. Over 68% of the hate crime incidents have been aimed towards them. They are dealing with the intersectionality of both gender and race. Our panel tonight is one of many, and it consists of 5 amazing API leaders in their respective fields who have been doing the work as artists, academics, journalists, and been vocal advocates for change. Thank you for being so game. This group was brought together in less than 24 minutes, so the format for today will be loose and free-flowing.
Hours. It was put together in less than 24 hours.
Hours. We hope it is a space for reflection and, if desired, venting, but also thoughts on ways we can all do our part. Tonight's conversation is also just the beginning of the efforts and steps that EWP will be taking. So please join our mailing list, our email list, or like us on social media so you can be updated on future events, programs, and action items. Note that this panel will be recorded and available on our social media platforms starting tomorrow. Now, let me introduce you to the incomparable Jully Lee, who will be moderating tonight's event. Jully is a multidisciplinary artist who was last seen in EWP and the Fountain Theater's production of Hannah and the Dread Gazebo, for which she was nominated for an Ovation Award. Jully is also the artistic director of Cold Tofu, the nation's first and longest running Asian American comedy group. So I'm going to turn things over to Jully, but I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you to our panelists for being with us.
Great, thank you so much, Snehal. It's wonderful to be able to have this space and time to commiserate and talk and reflect and process. And I think that's one thing that, at least for me, I'm still in process mode. So I'm so grateful to have this space with all you phenomenal women. Let me introduce Dr. Cynthia Wang. She is the assistant professor of communication studies at Cal State LA. Jennifer Chung, who's a singer, songwriter, and actress, and the founder of Today Worthy, also a former YouTube star who I recognize from the mid 2000s. Mei Lee, who's a veteran journalist. She is the first anchor woman at CNN of Korean descent, and also the founder of, or host and founder, I'm assuming, of the Mei Lee Show, and of course the ever-present Tamlyn Tomita, actress, activist, creator, keeper, and teller of our stories, and it's so visible. Welcome everybody who's watching. Thank you for joining us here. So yeah, just to start us off, where is everyone at right now emotionally? I know. Yeah, let's just start off with that, and anybody can jump in at any point. We're keeping this, you know, informal.
Thank you, Jully. Because I could hear, I know you personally, so I can hear the timbre in your voice wavering, and to be able to admit to say that we're all still processing what Mei Lee had said when we were all in the green room together, is that I think we could collectively all say that we're all at our own individual stages of grief, and to be thankful for the spaces that open up. I know that there have been a number of them online, in persons' backyards, on the phone, on Clubhouse, on all the social media, and I'm just so thankful for the cacophony, the orchestra of voices that are out there offering their opinions, the ability to say fuck you when persons are coming in with their own splaining, and to say that we need to be heard, we need to be listened to. This is our time. Thank God for the elected officials who who spoke at this morning's House Judiciary Committee meeting about the extent and the impact of the events that happened in Atlanta, but that this has been an ongoing 14-month escalating cycle of, but this is just one cycle of this kind of discrimination, of violence and racist acts that have committed specifically toward this group, but it echoes the white supremacist systems that we are here to try to dismantle and to erect a new system that we can all thrive in. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as we were saying before we started this program, yeah, we're all feeling still shocked and horrified. We're angry. We're tired. We're tired because we have been dealing with this for over a year. And so many of us have been talking about this, trying to raise the awareness, sound the alarm bells, and nobody listened. Mainstream media wasn't listening, political leaders weren't listening, and we were talking amongst ourselves, trying to raise awareness, and nobody was listening. And what that did was exaggerated the whole notion that we were invisible, that we didn't matter, that our voices weren't being heard. And so people just dismissed this as something that was serious. And I remember saying to people, something terrible is going to happen. Something bad is going to happen. And so I said, I've been saying in interviews, in media interviews, so it took a massacre of 8 people, 6 of them Asian women, for people to finally pay attention, to finally say this is an actual crisis that we need to look at in a serious way. I mean, I can't believe that's what it took, but okay, well then that's where we're at right now. If that's where we're at, then we have to use this as a powerful tool to try to incite this change and try to, eliminate this crazy anti-hate, anti-Asian hate and racism that has existed far beyond just the past year, as we know. But in the past year, it has been inflamed beyond belief.
Yeah, there's like a huge feeling of being overwhelmed because we are in a day and age where we hear messages all the time. And also there's a part of us that feels like we have to stay in the know. So whether it's to protect our own or to learn something or to educate other people, it's this constant of having to be awake when you're so exhausted and having to pace yourself and finding the right people to take turns with and finding that groove for yourself because everyone has different thresholds. It's like a sport, like we're having to learn how to keep going, but also know when to take pause and know who we can lean on, but also know when to step up when we see that a brother or sister is tired from doing the work. It's a battle.
Yeah, I think I appreciate all of your remarks because it's making me think of a lot that I've been thinking about in the last 24 hours. I have a little bit of a personal story that I'll try to put in context with everything. But maybe about 7 years ago, I was actually physically assaulted by someone and called, I hope I'm allowed to say this, but he called me a fucking chink as he, was assaulting me. And he wasn't quite right in the head. But I remember that my reaction after that really was like, oh, you play it off, right? You play it off. And I never thought of it. For me, I never really thought of it as like a traumatic event. And even now, I'm not really sure how to process it right. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I didn't feel like my stories or my feelings or my experience had a place in the conversations that are going on. And I think that this touches on a lot of what we're talking about, that feeling of being invisible, that feeling of like we talk within our communities, right? But when it gets to like mainstream media, we've been fairly invisible as a group. And, like May said, this isn't just in the past year. This has been going on for a very, very, very long time, right? And so I think like, my fellow panelists, I think we're probably wavering between being grateful that this space is given to us and that these conversations are happening, and just really heartbroken that it took a tragedy like Atlanta to make people care. So,
yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask Jennifer, you were raised in the Bay Area. And I know there's been a lot of anti-Asian violence in Oakland and the surrounding areas up there. And now you live in Atlanta. So how has it been for you having to process all this targeted violence in those two major cities that are so a part of your life?
Yeah, I feel like what happened here was a delayed response for me because as soon as I heard it, it was more numbness because my anxiety was so focused on worrying about my mom that's still in the Bay Area and feeling like, well, I'm so like shook that things are happening here, but I'm still worried about the fact that there's still attacks. Like just yesterday, there was another attack of a woman in the Bay Area. And we're just trying to process what's happened with all the murders here. So there's never really a time where I can be like, okay, like let's just take a moment. It's just a matter of like, okay, like I need to be able to process everything and also care so much about what's going on everywhere else, including where I am. And in a way, you don't even have time to think about like if I'm scared, if I'm even worried about myself, because we're worried about so many other people that we love and care about.
You know what's amazing, Jennifer? You mentioned that you're trying to keep up with all the incidents that take place, and we all know these attacks, these assaults, whether they're verbal or physical, they're happening every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And I still have people who are not in the Asian community telling me, I had no idea until they heard about these Georgia shootings that this was going on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how is that possible that you didn't know this was a problem for over a year? Yeah. But that goes to show you that the narrative is not being shared.
That's exactly
this information is not being broadcast and talked about, absorbed. And what I feel, and I've been saying this over and over again, there is a lack of empathy that exists for the Asian American community. And the African American community, we all have empathy because we know the history of slavery. We know the suffering that they've gone through for 4 centuries, right? But Asian American stories and Asian American history has not been told, and these incidents have not been shared amongst the general public. So therefore, people don't have that empathy for our community and our experiences. And that needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
Tamlyn, as such a visible actress and representative of the Asian American community in the media and Hollywood, have you seen a change in the representation? I mean, you've been acting since the 80s.
Exactly.
I mean, we
I
talked
understand
about the images of the Asian woman, right? And
yes, and this is something that has been in the pushed to the forefront of this conversation as a result of the Atlanta shootings. Excuse me. And it's the intersectionality, for using that positive word that we're trying to use, about fetishism, hypersexualization, marginalization, and racism. They are not mutually exclusive. This all happened kind of at once, and people's filters are looking at the events that unfolded on Tuesday night with that kind of, oh, that wasn't racist, oh, that wasn't fetishist. But it all feeds into it, because we can actually, by the evidence that can be shown, that he specifically went. We find this out through the Korean news outlets, that he specifically went to Asian spas, directly targeted Asian women in order to rid himself of his own temptation. Why didn't he go to strip clubs? Why didn't he jack off himself and just cut his dick off like a Lorena Babbitt? It's like that's the kind of response that I'm coming in, because it's a violent act, it's a violent reaction. But in terms of Hollywood, it feeds into it, and I am absolutely partial of that. My role as Kumiko in Karate Kid 2 happens to be this delicate young girl who happens to fall in love with the lead, but she was able to fight back. So I was not, I'm not in the traditional classical mode, but it does fit into that desirable Asian woman. And yes, I do own up to that, but I have been able to, to work on other levels that don't depict me as the typical stereotypical Asian gal character. But we have to be cognizant. We have to call out our allies, especially in the creative fields, because the stories that we see on television, that we see on film, that we see on stage, that we see in these Zoom rooms are part and parcel of the kinds of storytelling that we're used to. It's like, oh, look at, the Asian girls. She's so much more nicer than the Caucasian girls or the Black girls or Latino girls or the First Nation girls. No, we're all individual, and you should see us like that. So to be able to amplify those kinds of stories, the diversity of stories, Asian Americans are not a monolith, as is all our other ethnic groups. We need to keep on amplifying the diversity of our stories and not just say, this was a money-making story, let's just repeat it. So that's the kind of emphasis that I can be responsible for in my own field. And I look to the academics like Cynthia, to the journalists like Mei Lee, and all our other artists like Jennifer and you, Jully, to continue this widening, this breathing in and spouting out of all the variety of stories that are to tell.
But people really need to realize what's going on here with the Georgia shootings and the targeting of these women. Unfortunately, I'm going to share, I don't know if you guys heard today, the breaking news was 3 of the women were shot in the head. So this was targeted. This was not random. He saw their faces, he saw who they were, and he shot them in the head. I'm sorry to be so graphic, but we need to hear this because it makes me so angry when I hear these officials and the authorities still saying, oh no, can't call this a hate crime. No, not race driven.
Bad day. It's a very bad day.
No, he had a bad day. And even the FBI director today on NPR was interviewed, and he said, yeah, I don't see this as a hate crime. What? 3 Asian spas were targeted deliberately. Now we found out how some of them were killed. And you're saying this is not a hate crime? This is not a gender crime? This is not driven by pure hate because of race and sexuality? As Tamlyn was saying, this all intersects. We cannot separate these themes. We cannot separate these topics. And so for people to think, oh yeah, he just had some sex addiction and that was a problem. No, fuck you for saying that. Fuck you for saying that. Do not control this narrative. Do not take this narrative away from us, and do not take our voices away from us. And that's what pisses me off the most. So this, what we're doing here needs to be done more and more and more.
There's this huge boulder that is like suffocating all of us that has to do with the stereotypes and the over-sexualization, and the people who can't see the biases and how it's been ingrained in them mentally. They can't separate it. It's so hard for them to understand that, yes, this is actually targeted and it is a hate crime because of the sexualization that's been put into our narrative, which has to do with media, right? Like the way that we're portrayed, and the fact that, gathering together like this, it still feels very brand new, because we're not given the platform. So we've had to create platforms. And if we're not given the chance to speak or be heard, that's why it's so important for us as individuals to keep sharing and keep telling stories so that our little subgroups can continue to do their work and spread, because nobody wants to give us the time of day.
Yeah, talking about subgroups and what Tamlyn had mentioned about the Korean media, letting people know that, I believe the quote that the gunman had used was kill all Asians. Mm-hmm. And that has never been, I Googled that phrase. I looked for it on every major media site, that's, English speaking, couldn't find it anywhere.
No.
And
it was only reported by Chosun Ilbo, which is the Korean newspaper. And I couldn't find any confirmation. I read the article and I saw the quote, but it's not being confirmed by anyone else. I have a theory about this. One of my theories is it could be completely inaccurate and misreported, or if this was a Korean witness who's already deathly afraid and saw the horror of this murder, this person is not going to want to speak to anybody really. And maybe the only media they trusted was a Korean language speaker, right? And so they're going to feel much more comfortable speaking in Korean and telling their story about what they witnessed. So that's part of me feels like that may be the reason why we're not seeing it anywhere else. But where the hell are the cops then? Where are they in questioning these witnesses? Why aren't we hearing any of this? you know, that's what I'm so frustrated with right now about this case.
I think they're really busy empathizing with the gunman right now. So
Wow.
that's where they are.
I know. So I do believe that there are a lot of missing elements. And obviously, look, a crime like this takes a long time to investigate. So we have to be, you know, give them a little bit of slack because they need to, turn over every stone and all of that. But because of the sensitivity of this subject and because of the outrage and the coverage it's getting, I just feel like they're not handling this very well thus far.
Yeah, Cynthia, I wanted to ask you about your experience with the assault, because I know that when I'm asked, has anything happened to you, I have to say yes, but I can't really think of moments because you just kind of swallow it or brush it off. So how has it been for you to have to kind of hold on to this? I mean, you did brush it off, but then it's like, but it happened, and it was a physical assault.
Right. So it happened, and then I forgot about it. So I'm sure that there's some conditioning, right? That's just like, oh, that doesn't matter to me. And I mean, the first time that I talked about it semi-publicly was on a Facebook post, and people were just like, oh my gosh, that's nuts. But I think that in some ways we ourselves have been conditioned to not talk about it. Right. There's this in Chinese, there's that term, which translates to, I think it was Amy Tan who originally put it as swallowing bitterness. The literal term is eating bitterness, right? But it's swallowing bitterness. So we don't talk about it. And I think that's, for whatever reason, I don't really want to, get into that. And I really, I'll be honest, it didn't bother me until all this came up, and suddenly we're having these conversations. And I think it makes us retroactively go back to look at all of these things that have happened. And Jully, I totally empathize with that because this happened so much. The only reason that one sticks out is because there was like a physical injury, right? And that it got escalated to that point. But all of the other stuff is just almost background noise, right? Like we deal with it constantly and we keep on brushing it off, right? So in this case, it's like, I think that these conversations are so important. And to maybe tangent it just a little bit, I do keep on thinking about how do we, as Asian American communities, how do we create like avenues of solidarity with other communities of color, right? How do we build that coalition? I think that it's important to recognize that there's a lot of animosity between communities of color, right? And that a lot of the hate incidences that have been perpetuated are not all perpetuated by white people, right? And so, and within our own communities, right, our own Asian communities, we see a lot of anti-Blackness, right? So I think that we need to think about like how intersectionalities is being really important in building coalition with other marginalized groups and also other communities of color. So I think about that a lot. I don't have answers, right? But I think that those are conversations that we keep on having. I think to Tamlyn's point about media representation, so important, right? Because I think that media and entertainment are huge ways that we can change hearts and minds, right? It's like media on that macro level of having more diverse representations, having, just more, right? So we aren't seen as this monolithic group. And, and then on the individual level, I think about how can we have conversations with people, with individual people. And that's hard, right? Because we're dealing with like a lot of the just denying of our experiences or dealing with our own internalized like quietness to not create waves, right? And so I think that like it's important to have conversations even with people who disagree with us. And I keep on thinking, it is so burdensome, and it takes so much emotional bandwidth to keep on telling our stories. But if we don't tell them, who will, right? And so I had like prepared remarks, so I'm just doing it really quick.
Oh, you don't have to be quick, Cynthia. Not at all. No, take the time. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
Can I ask a question to all of you? And that is, Cynthia's talking about having sort of repressed her, the thoughts of this assault, and then how you know, I think we all have experiences of being made to feel, you know, like objectified or made fun of, all of that as Asian girls growing up in America, and then Asian women. So yeah, it's true. All of these incidents now are making us all have flashbacks to what all the times we were treated this way. And I feel like, you know, that did damage, right? We all have scars. And because of what's been happening last year, these scars have been sort of reopened. The wounds have been reopened. So I'm curious with you guys if, you know, if you feel like you have these scars and how that shaped the way you behaved and, you know, your character and how you see things now about yourself, you know, self-esteem, all of that, because I really do think that it had an impact on me for a very long time. And still does to this day. There are triggers. There are still some triggers for me.
You know what, May, like, as you were saying that, I'm like, I'm still, even in this panel right now, I still want to downplay all of that, right? I'm still being just like, oh, well, maybe I'm overreacting, right? There's still that going on. So yeah.
Interesting.
There's so much that I am not aware of for myself. I don't go to therapy, and I know that I need therapy. But, you know, just thinking back, I realized pretty recently, at least in the last 5 years, that I don't make eye contact with strangers, which is bizarre because I'm very gregarious. And then it hit me that, oh, I don't make eye contact, especially with men, because when growing up, when you do that, they will do stuff like stick their tongue out, like just make these crude gestures or something that's just so disgusting. And I realized that I conditioned myself to not make eye contact. And that's just like a minor thing that I wasn't even aware of until recently. And these experiences were happening since I was, you know, in junior high school. These little things that add up. And I know that I'm carrying so much burden. But yeah, I think therapy is very important, and I do need to look into that. So that's me. Okay.
But awareness is the first step. But
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer and Tamlyn, I'm curious if you guys felt the same way.
You go, Jen.
You know, like, I was an early adopter of YouTube, like in 2007. And for me, like, I grew up in the Bay Area, so I was majority around a lot of Asians. So putting myself out there and uploading, like, myself singing, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was more so I'm sharing with my friends, because it just became a big platform. And that was a big thing where a lot of people were being exposed to an Asian person singing R&B or whatever, like, for the first time. So of course there was parts of it where people are happy that they see representation of themselves. And there were so many people that were not happy with the fact that I was singing in, you know, English without an accent, or bringing up that I shouldn't be singing, I should be doing other things. And it's traumatizing. And there was a time where I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep uploading songs, even though performing is my love. And there's this conflict of, like, wanting to kind of hide, because it was also a time when people could upload video responses to your videos. And I would get really crude ones and couldn't get those images out of my head. And even now, like, as I share things about how we're feeling, people will literally go out of your way to find your email address and address the things that you're talking about. This one guy, like, emailed me saying that he is very upset with me that I brought up white supremacy, because he's a white man who's been married to his Chinese wife for 16 years, and he treats his wife with respect, as if I was even talking about him, and how they, like, project things. So it's just crazy, because people will go out of their way to let you know that you're wrong about something that they don't even understand, and make it so personal about them. And then they're, like, victim blaming you. It's hard because you're trying to speak up for yourself, but also you're afraid because people will talk back and not actually be listening to you. And I find that also I get scared about standing up for myself in person. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, if someone were to say something to me or do something to me, I would do this and I would do that. And I recently had an incident where this white man was talking to me a certain way and, like, looking at me, like, dead in the eyes. And it made me wonder, are you talking to me like this because I'm a woman, because I'm an Asian woman? Do you think that you have authority over me, even though we don't know each other, we don't have that rapport? I can't help but keep having those thoughts in my head and wondering, is this a race thing? Is this a female thing? I don't know.
And that's all programming. That's decades of programming for all of us.
Yeah.
That even to this day, I'm 54, even to this day, there are certain situations where I kind of say, are they doing this because I'm Asian?
Right.
I mean, we're programmed to feel that way because it's being Asian when we were growing up was treated as a bad thing or a negative thing or a less than thing. And so therefore we still internalize that feeling of not belonging or not being 100%, whatever that value is. And so it still does fuck with us, doesn't it? Tamlyn?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of not seeing our individual selves as individuals. It's the invisibilization and it's the exoticization of Asian women, Asian American women. It perpetually. I benefit from being a petite, little, pretty Asian girl. And I also benefit from the fact that my father was an LAPD officer. And he was a person who founded the Asian Task Force, the first Asian Task Force. So it precedes the whole New York City hate crime Asian Task Force. And it's like, did you guys go out as my father and his partners did to the communities and teach them about self-defense, about calling the police, about calling the authorities, about going to your churches, about going to your temples and reporting this? It's talking about it. It's that, what you're going through, Jully, about, mental health. It's about taking care of our mental health. I'm very proud that my father was a part of that late 1970s kind of proactive part of LAPD to go out in the Asian American communities at that time. And he told me, if anybody treats you wrong, you better fight back. You better to never start a fight, but finish that fight. So if some man looks at you, you look at him and say, fuck you, and stop that shit. It was very, I tell that to my nieces and my little nieces, it's against the whole Disney princess, save me, save me. It's like, feel the scream, feel the roar in you. You are a woman warrior, own that. And that's my personal experience. And it's like, I'm trying to amplify that we do have our power as individuals.
Yes.
But that collectively, we need to make sure that we solidify with our fellow sister. Is it our fellow sisters? Actually, that's a vocabulary.
Oh, no, that's it.
Right? But our sisters and our fellow brothers to say, there are things that are wrong and things that are right. And it's okay to call people out on them without shaming them. That's one step that I think we can do. There's this whole controversy that resulted in Alexei McCammon's resignation, becoming the editor-in-chief at Teen Vogue, is something that's like, I have to, it's the conversation in me is still going on. And it's like, I'm not sure where I stand on that yet, because I'm reacting to her early, tweets, but I take into account that her apologies seem sincere. But again, how do we tender apologies? How do we accept apologies? And how do we move on? So this is the conversation that I'm interested in, but because it is a part of our moving forward healthfully and mentally and emotionally.
Did you see that she resigned today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She did. Yeah. I mean, she was 17 when she made those comments, right?
Right.
And so I think you're conflicted as I am, Tamlyn, as well. Because we're reacting to the horrible racist comments she said, but she was 17.
And especially a woman of color.
Right, and a woman of color. So has she matured since then and learned that is wrong, and so she moves forward in a different way, taking a different path. Because we all remember when we were 17, and I'm sure we all did pretty stupid shit, But here's the thing: I think the lesson in that, and hopefully this is what's going to start happening, is that Asians for so long we've been the butt of every joke, openly. You can't say things about other communities, but with Asians, you can make open jokes about us, and it's so funny. And if we push back, they're like, oh, come on, it's a joke.
Right.
Come on, you're too sensitive, right? I mean, even at the Oscars, Chris Rock made that joke about the accountants, and the Asian kid. So there's a tone deafness about what is a joke and what should be taken lightly versus seriously. And when it comes to the Asian community, for some reason, we've always been the butt of every joke, and we haven't really pushed back. But I think that again is also changing, which is thank God for that.
I also want to add, during that Chris Rock joke, it was during a time of Oscars So White. So when racism was very at the forefront of everyone's mind, and yet still that joke was okay to tell.
Because Asians were not seen as, a community that people needed to pay attention to as, victims of racism, and that we should see them as people of color, in a minority group. We just weren't seen. So how many times have you seen, media refer to different studies or different, whatever statistics, and all they say, the African-American community and Latinx. That's it. They stop there. Asians, hello. Yeah, I mean, that's where I want this to be the start of this inclusion that involves Asians as well.
And it takes time to make sure we recognize it, because it goes on to the indigenous communities and our LGBT. However, we want to be able to make sure that everybody feels included. At the hearing this morning, Daniel Day Kim had said that he asked a poll worker about the polls, the statistics about voters, and they were white, black, and Latino. Where are the Asian Americans? The poll worker told Daniel Day Kim to his face, they are statistically insignificant. Asian American Pacific Islanders are statistically insignificant. So again, this is a moment that we can all take advantage of and say, demand that you see us, that we are a part of this community that for so long has been fighting for being seen as the Asian American Pacific Islander umbrella, but to also see us as the 147 distinct categories that's under the Asian American Pacific Island that we inhabit. So this is a part of the conversation. It takes time and it takes patience, but I feel the momentum moving forward and the collection of our voices gathering together.
Okay, that poll worker was just an idiot. I mean, seriously, what an asshat comment, because we know the data. Asians are the fastest growing ethnic population in the country, the fastest growing voting bloc in the country. So, God. Oh
Can I also add that I had actually taken a COVID test on set last month, and they ask you for your, I guess, race, and Asian wasn't part of it. It was white, black, I think Hispanic, and other. And I said, oh, I thought I had misread it. So I went to the guy, I don't see mine. And he said, yeah, I don't know why they don't have Asian. So you just have to mark other, which was so bizarre to me. I'm in LA.
Yeah, LA, come on.
Wow.
Hey, by the way, I wanted to give a shout out to all of the amazing comments. So for those of, I have my comments box open. So those of us who have been affirming, those of you who have been affirming, sharing your own stories, I just wanted to say thank you so much.
How are you seeing the comments? I see.
So on the right,
I have it on private chat. That's why. Oh my gosh, you're right. Look at all the comments.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad that people are feeling, that they're involved in this too. But anyway.
Yes. Thank you for calling that out, Cynthia. Earlier, I saw something about the model minority myth that we're all, we all know about. So let's talk about that, because I don't think that not everyone knows about it. To me.
Cynthia, you should start this conversation.
Oh my goodness, we're gonna go there. There's actually a great article from 2017 that I think has been sort of making the rounds, that talks about it a little bit. And I mean, my take really on that is that the model minority myth has allowed Asian and Asian Americans to be sort of white adjacent, but because of that, then it renders us sort of invisible in this weird way. So within the scholarship, I actually go back to Claire Kim's theory of racial triangulation, where she's really trying to make sense of where Asians fit into this false binary of black and white, right? And I think we have to remember on some level that the model minority myth, which is indeed a myth, right? That like the myth itself means that it is put in place in order to uphold certain values and ideologies and beliefs that may or may not be true. And in this case, obviously is harmful. And that was put in place so that we can have the narrative of good minority, bad minority, right? So if Asian and Asian Americans are upheld to be this, this good minority, right? Then other marginalized groups, other communities of color, other people of color are then seen as the bad minorities, right? And then they're pointing to us being like, look, they're the model. Why can't you be more like them? Clearly meritocracy works, right? And that's why it's a myth, because it doesn't. And it serves to drive a wedge between our communities of color. And I think that is why the model minority myth is so it's so harmful, because it's rooted in these ideologies of white dominance in order so that we don't have the ability in some ways to form coalition, to increase solidarity. And I think that that's something I'm really sort of concerned about that. And I'm like, we really need to address this. Like I've been in this mode where it's like, we need to be forming coalitions with other communities of color. We need to sort of make the conversation more complex than just white and non-white. Right. We need to be able to talk about this, and we need to have, I think, really hard and painful conversations.
So,
Cynthia,
really
scary conversations.
Don't you think it really has to then deal with the fact that the model minority myth was created by white supremacists to divide and conquer, right? Again, like you said, to compare, oh, well, the Asians are good, so why can't the Black community, why can't you guys be better? Why can't you be more like them? And like you're saying, it's a way to keep us controlled, right?
Right.
And that is the problem. And so I think there's a lack of education when it comes to why are these stereotypes in existence? Well, it's because the idea is to separate us. It is to keep us down. It is to drive that wedge.
For the advantage of making sure that the existing meritocracy and the white supremacist system, it is a white supremacist system, still remains standing and strong. And it's the wedge of the model minority myth that is, I read a great article about how it can be used in comparison to how plantations were serviced, that there were the field slaves and the house slaves, and that the closer you literally got to the white man living in the plantation house was the better slave, and he or she were benefited from that proximity. But it also is, as Asian American Pacific Islanders, we're also coupled with the idea, what's been evident now is the yellow peril myth. Is that so model minority? And so which one are you? Which one do you belong to, Asians, here in America? Are you the yellow peril or are you the model minority? Which is also strengthened by the idea that we're seeing, oh God, there's super popular shows like House of Ho and Crazy Rich Asians. It's like, oh yeah, they're doing perfectly fine. Look at they're riding around in Rolls Royces and Rolodexes and all. And it's like, no, that's not how it's true. Because 1 in 4 in New York City, this is another stat that I heard, are below the poverty level. Look at the strata of what it means to be Asian American Pacific Islander America. It's not just model minority. We are not the yellow peril, because that's some racist myth bullshit. But again, these are the ideas that we're constantly having to wrestle with.
And I actually think that those two images of model minority and yellow peril, it's not like which one are you. I feel like it's more like they decide who we are when. Like
it's conditional.
It's
conditional.
Yeah.
Our acceptance is conditional.
Yes. And we buy into like there are huge portions of Asian and Asian American communities that buy into the model minority myth too, right? And so, I think that through this process, I'm huge on self-reflection. That's sort of why I am in education, because I feel like that's important. But I think that in a lot of ways, when we talk about, right, like how do we build coalition, how do we sort of heal within our own communities, we also have to do self-reflection to say, how much are we buying into this? How much are we buying into this idea of the American dream and meritocracy when the evidence points to the fact that that's not what's going on? So
a little bit about my journey is I am an immigrant. I was born in Korea, raised in the Bay Area, but my mom was a single parent and she was a dance teacher. So we grew up very poor on food stamps. It was just a different experience from most of my peers. But I can recognize that as an Asian, one of the few Asians in a lower school district area, I lived up to the expectations they had of me. I feel like maybe they paid a little bit more attention to me. And even, so education-wise, like they might have pushed me further, so I might have benefited from that. And I do think like this education system for serving me in its own way. And then moving to Georgia, I was very much exposed to the fact that I was surrounded by Asians when I was in California. And moving here, I've been able to make best friends with people who are very different from me. So if I could give a shout out to Be the Bridge, they're a great nonprofit organization that teach equity and reconciliation and do a lot of educational content. And it's founded by Latasha Morrison. She has a book that you should totally check out. But with being a model minority, there's so much of it that we benefit from, privilege-wise too, which is something that I do recognize. But I also think it's like this weird gaze of like, oh, because they're so precious, Asians are so precious and they could be our quiet wives and serve us, like they're the best. Like just because like we're this thing that could just be passed around because we're quiet and we don't speak up for ourselves. So like, I think the louder we get also with having conversation with other minorities and bridging that gap, like that's really going to be the thing that breaks a lot of the things that we're tied to.
Yeah, no, I want to share a story about how sometimes you got to fight back, regardless of the risk. So when I was a journalist at a local station in Dayton, Ohio, and I grew up in Ohio, obviously it was a very white, sort of blue collar, situation. And I was at a protest of a ZZ Top concert because Miller Beer was sponsoring the concert, and the truck drivers who were part of the union were sort of arguing their pay and all of that. So there was all these protesters and people at the ZZ Top concert trying to get in. And so I'm interviewing as this local reporter trying to get reaction. And all of a sudden I hear to my left while I'm doing this interview, "Hey, Connie Chung," because I got that all the time, of course, because Connie Chung was the only Asian in television. And because I was Asian, that's all that anyone wanted to call me. So I ignored that. But then, of course, I heard the chorus of "Ching Chong, Chang Ching," right? I lose it, drop my mic in the middle of the interview, march over to 6 white guys in a circle, push one guy out of the way to break open the circle, get in the middle of the circle, and I say, "What did you say?" And they're like, "Nothing." "What the fuck did you say?" They're like, "We didn't say nothing." I said, "We don't need any more goddamn racists like you on this planet, so shut the fuck up." I mean, I'm 5 feet tall, you guys, okay?
You went in.
And then I just march back and I pick up my mic and I say to the guy, "I'm so sorry, sir. Can you continue?" Now, here's the best part. This is the lesson about speaking out. About 20, 30 minutes later, a group of union guys, and they're big, burly, bearded guys, right? They come over to me and I'm like, "Ooh, what's going on?" This guy comes up to me and says, "Mei Lee." I says, "Yes." And he said, "We heard what happened to you back there. If we had been around, we would have kicked their asses for you. That's a very brave thing you did. So we're proud of you." Mm. Yeah. So sometimes you got to stand up. That's right. You got to speak up and you got to fight back. Yeah, you know what? It can make a difference.
Absolutely, because it inspires people to come in and be in alignment with you. It's
and it opens people's eyes to something that maybe they never would have witnessed before.
Yeah, even if it's the first time to speak up, to speak out. And I do think that when we see the growing embrace of social media, that people are using those platforms in order to speak up, but to do so in forms like this, because we're still confined by COVID, but to be able to have these discussions in person and to literally look in people's eyes and to connect, that is a super powerful thing. And just say that, can we talk about this? They're small discussions, but they're powerful discussions. There are tsunamis that come from it. It's the pebble in the water. And it's just to take the brave action of courage to be able to tell your story. And for those of us, for those of the people who don't have that, that confidence or that self-assurance or self-esteem, it's like, try. There's no losing in trying, in letting your voice out.
Yeah. I have to admit though, like moving to Georgia has given me more anxiety to speak up for myself because it is such a gun-toting state. There's a lot of fear about that. And I think about how, like, in other states, like there have been a lot of attacks, but I'm not surprised that this guy killed people with a gun. And I think about that, like when I had that experience with the white man who like looked me dead in the eyes and like cussed me out, I didn't speak up because I really was like, you might have a gun, honestly. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. And that's a real fear too.
It is. I think in this day and age, that risk is much higher than it used to be back when I did what I did. And so that is something that unfortunately is a risk, a higher risk for sure.
Yeah. And I like applaud everyone here too, because when we say things online, like we don't know who's watching, we don't know who's reading, and we do put ourselves at risk every day, like when we share genuinely how we feel, which is why I think it adds to the things that we've been taught to not speak up. And people are surprised that people are actually like sharing their opinion because they're just so not used to hearing different opinions of how we feel.
How many of your mothers are telling you not to speak up? I mean, my mother keeps on telling me this. She keeps on saying, you got to be careful. You can't say these things. I'm like, Mom, I got to say it. But I mean, because that's how she's thinking. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to just put out, and if it could be put in the chat, is that there's an extremely wonderful resource, IHOLLABACK.org, which offers bystander intervention training for intervention training to stop harassment, specifically anti-Asian harassment. But I think that kind of training would be invaluable for any of us who witness or are a victim of that kind of harassment. So IHollaback.org offers, and they've been super popular. I think 2,000, 3,000 people attended the last session. So I think there's I think at least 6 more sessions to come.
That's
great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful to hear. Oh my God.
Yeah. IHollaback.org.
Oh, there we go. Somebody just posted it. Somebody just posted it online. So that's great. That's great.
Thank you, Irene.
Hey, ladies, you know that we talked about this before. Unfortunately, I now have to hop to another event, another panel about this very subject. So, spreading the word, trying to get everyone on board. But I hate to leave this early because this is amazing. Seriously, you're all so inspiring. Thank you so much. Seriously, I'm like starting to cry right now. So thank you, and keep going.
Thank you so much,
Keep
May.
going.
Thank you, May.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, for May, this panel was her third in a line of 4 today. Today. She's very busy. Yes, and Tamlyn, I know you've been speaking for months on panels, on news outlets. How has that been? I mean, I saw you in a documentary years ago, but you are a voice of Asian American activism. And I'm sure you didn't know you were going to do that when you became an actress.
No, and yeah, again, I benefit from being in the spotlight, so I knew. I guess it's because of my parents, and the people whom I love that surround me, that you have this spotlight, you have this platform. So take it and use it for good, and use it to highlight issues that affect other people, communities, events that need to be examined and really investigated, and hopefully be supported and assisted. Thank you. I'm just waddling through like the rest of us. I'm not an academic like Dr. Wang is. I'm not a YouTube star, so I don't speak to the young people, but I just try to connect really, people, or connect with people, that do the good work for all. So thank you.
Thank you, Tamlyn. Jennifer, how are things in Atlanta right now? You're there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people are shook because, it's very much home, and it's people were attacked in their workplace, and we worry about our parents and our families because there are businesses that people know where there's going to be a lot of Asians there, and you just never know. It's not even about like, oh, just keep your head down and keep working. Like, we're at working. That's what we're doing, and that's what they were doing, and that's what happened to them. If you haven't heard of Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Atlanta, they came out with great resources on how you can co-sign their statement, give donations, and if there's resources that you can help out with, whether it's like translating, they do great things because they also support people with translations when it comes to lawyer things like trials, and have been a big game changer for turning Georgia blue. So they're an organization overall, and Georgia has one of the biggest refugee counties called Clarkston. So there's just a lot of great work that they do that we could be supporting. And yeah, I think when this became viral on Twitter with Georgia, that's when I knew like, okay, I think we're gonna get more coverage on what's happening to Asian Americans, because it's been trending on Twitter. And before, like you wouldn't really see it unless you're following certain news outlets. So it's sad that a tragedy is really highlighting, it had to be this bad, like for people to start turning heads. But that's why we have to be diligent about continuing to share and use this momentum.
Absolutely. In terms of like invisibility and I guess the trend of how the news goes, I had seen that Sean King, who's a very present social activist, huge social media presence, he posted about anti-Asian hate and violence. And this is a very long conversation to have. And I think Snehal will be planning another panel to discuss this, talking about Cynthia, about the intersectionality of these different communities and support and the self-reckoning within our own communities. But, you know, scrolling through the comments was really overwhelming, because the anti-Asian hate is so real. And I honestly didn't know how big it was, how prevalent it was, and how people don't see the activism that we do, you know, during Black Lives Matter, you know, marching, donating, and all these things that we've been trying to do. It really goes unseen. And it just so speaks to our invisibility. It was just the frustration and the sadness of where this is, of where that was going. But speaking on that, allyship, any words or tips for those who want to support Asian Americans in this time right now?
I think give us the space to tell our stories and validate them, right? Like validate our experiences. I've since I posted whatever I did on Facebook, there was, and I did not intend this, but there was just this amazing outpouring of like friends who would text and message and things like that, and that is validating because, like, you know, we are seen. I think on the macro level, I just have to give like a few shout outs to like just East West players for doing this. Tuesday Night Projects provides an amazing space for artists and activism and community. Cold Tofu, Jully, like I think that also provides just a great space for art and for representation. And I think that it's in these spaces that we can really be telling our stories.
Yeah. When it comes to like allyship, I actually had scheduled a time to talk with my TV and film agents here in Georgia. And it was before the tragedies happened, but I just happened to be the next day. And I just had a conversation with them about, hey, this is what's been going on in case you didn't know. And I told them that there were just certain rules that I plan on not moving forward with when it comes to auditions, just because I don't think it serves my community. And I felt very supported in that way. And I'm sure there's a lot of artists that are watching right now. So my hope is that if you are represented or working with other people, you know, communicate with them about your values and what you care about. And if you have the ability to share with them that that's the stuff that you don't want to do, I think it's important for you to speak up for yourself and not feel like you have to compromise your values to work in a system that's not necessarily set up to, you know, lift you up. But I think that there is a movement happening, and I was pleasantly surprised and joyful that they understood where I was coming from when it came to that.
Wow.
The idea also, as Asians and Asian Americans, it's the conversations that we need to continue to have, because we being Americans of Asian descent is one thing, and how American we are seems to be defined by others, but we know who we are, and to be seen as such is the ongoing movement, is to see us as Americans, as to see us as fellow brothers and sisters. But the ongoing conversation I'd love to have is exactly what Dr. Wang was saying. It's about the intersectionality between our other ethnic communities, but also within our own community ourselves. It's like, what other stories are there? It's like, go to East West, go to Cold Tofu. What do you guys want to talk about? What do you want to see? Write your favorite networks, via Twitter. It's like, hey, how about a Punjabi musical, on a half-hour basis every week, like a contest like that, that rather than Masked Singer. It's like, I would love to see Bangara. Because yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, to see the Irish Bangara three guys, dance. I just thought, amazing. Again, so that's the kind of joy, that's the kind of potentiality that I would love to see. And I go to East West, I go to the theaters that support color, people of color stories, and other perspectives that are pertinent and speak out, that don't speak down to us or belittle us or objectify us or invisibilize us. This is the kind of notion that I'd like to continue in having the discussion, because in telling our stories, as Dr. Wang was saying, is important, and to also be able to enlighten and inspire people is I guess the world that is my jam.
Mine too. Mine too. Thank you. Or there's so much more to talk about. So Snehal, I beg you to hold more of these panels where we can process. And I know you've been doing like a weekly panel. I don't know how you all do it. You've been so busy throughout this pandemic.
Thank you so much, Jully, and thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences. There's so much to, as you said, Jully, to think about, to unpack. White adjacent. It's a while since I've heard that. Jully, I want to thank you for using humor and knowing the power of it to affect change. I want to thank May for being so unafraid and making sure our voices are not taken away for us. May also, I think, has the record for dropping the most F-bombs on an EWP panel. We will give her.
Tamlyn's probably close. Tamlyn's probably pretty close.
Tamlyn's close.
Jennifer, thank you so much for reminding us also of that class as an intersecting factor, that being, that we're such there's so much complexity in our community. I mean, I think even just explaining to people the difference between Asian and Asian American is, just getting to that point can sometimes be so challenging, let alone kind of, breaking it down into how specific our communities get and how diverse it really is. Cynthia, I'm so sorry of what happened to you, and I want to thank you for sharing your story, and also for all of your wonderful self-reflecting. It's so great that we have you in our corner. And Tamlyn, I want to thank you for acting since the 80s. That is what I want to thank
Can I just say, growing up, I wanted to be Tamlyn. So,
Like Joy Luck Club, Karate Kid 2. I mean, that like such classics and so influential,
And we get such a revival, but no, feel the scream, feel the roar within you. Tamlyn, those are such great quotes. Jeff Yang, if you're listening, we would like t-shirts for those. And we can credit Tamlyn. Thank you, Tamlyn, also for showing our It's an Honor to Be Asian shirt. I actually have been, during this panel, talking to our wonderful board member, Jeff Yang, and I want you all to know that a special edition of Honor to Be Asian shirts will be coming out. So please keep an eye out on East West Players' social media platforms and things like that. Don't buy the bootleg ones from Amazon. But these will be a special edition one to really rally folks around this moment. And I want to thank all of you who joined us tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences in the chat, and all of you that have been doing it over on social media over the last few days. No, we want to hear your experiences. We need to hear your stories. Please keep speaking out, and please keep supporting and reaching out to each other. I'm reminded of the Japanese, as I was watching, the Japanese term yohen, which I was introduced to through Philip Kan Gotanda's beautiful play. Yohen is a Japanese term for the occasional accident that causes a clay object to come out slightly misshapen when pottery is fired. And it's up to the individual viewing that object to decide in the end whether the imperfection is ugly or beautiful. Yohen literally means changed by the fire or the flame. And I just want folks to know that above all else, the scars that we bear are painful. They mark us, but I hope they are not the things that define our beautiful, joyous, monolithic community. And above all, we need to never be afraid to demand to be seen. So thank you all again for joining us tonight. As we mentioned, we will be sharing this event out through our platforms, as well as the links to all the different things our panelists talked about. And thank you again, and please be safe and be careful and be vigilant. Until next time.
Thank you. Yes, all the hearts.